Hello, my friends. Welcome back to English Room. Take a moment, wherever you are right now, on a bus, in your kitchen, lying in bed, just pause for a second. I want you to picture something. Imagine you are standing on top of a mountain. The wind is cold and sharp against your face. Below you, in every direction, there are valleys, forests, and rivers stretching as far as you can see. And cutting across all of it, over the hills, through the valleys, climbing the steepest ridges, there is a wall. Not just any wall. A wall that goes on forever. A wall so long that if you started walking along it today, it would take you more than a year to reach the other end. You have seen pictures of it, I am certain. The Great Wall of China is one of the most photographed structures on Earth. It appears on calendars, on posters, on the covers of travel magazines. But here is the thing about famous things. The more famous something is, the more we think we already know its story. We see the image so many times that we stop looking carefully. Today, we are going to look carefully. Because the true story of the Great Wall is not the one most people know. It is not a simple story of one wall built by one emperor. It is a story of fear, cruelty, sacrifice, and a human stubbornness, a refusal to give up that lasted for almost 2,000 years. It is a story about what ordinary people endure when powerful people have enormous ambitions. Come with me. Let us begin. Here is the first surprise. The Great Wall is not one wall. It never was. When most people imagine the Great Wall, they picture the section you see in photographs, a wide, well-built road on top of a wall, with tall watchtowers rising at regular intervals, winding dramatically over green mountains. That image is real, but it represents only a small portion of the full story. The truth is that the Great Wall is a collection of many walls, built over many centuries, by many different rulers, for many different reasons. The earliest walls were built over 2,500 years ago, during a period in Chinese history called the Warring States period. This was a time of chaos, which means extreme disorder and confusion. China was not yet one unified country. It was a collection of separate kingdoms, each with its own king, its own army, and its own ambitions. These kingdoms were constantly at war with each other. So each one built walls, not to keep out foreign enemies, but to protect themselves from their neighbors next door. These early walls were not made of the stone and brick we associate with the Great Wall today. They were made of rammed earth, a technique where workers packed layers of wet soil tightly together until it dried into something solid and hard. It was not glamorous, but it worked. At this point in history, there was no single Great Wall. There were just many smaller odal walls scattered across a landscape of rival kingdoms. Imagine a map of China covered in short, disconnected lines going in different directions. That is what the wall looked like in the beginning. The idea of connecting them, of turning those scattered lines into one continuous structure, came from one of the most fascinating and terrifying figures in all of Chinese history. His name was Ying Zheng, but history remembers him by another name. Qin Shi Huang. The title Qin Shi Huang means First Emperor of Qin, and that title tells you everything about this man. He did not want to be one king among many. He wanted to be the first and the only. By 221 BC, after years of brilliant and brutal military campaigns, he had achieved exactly that. He had conquered every rival kingdom and unified China for the first time in its history. He created one country with one ruler, one currency, one system of writing, and one set of laws. It was an extraordinary achievement. Historians still debate whether he was a genius, a monster, or both. Qin Shi Huang had a problem that kept him awake at night, a problem that all the wealth and power in the world could not easily solve. To the north of China, beyond the mountains and the grasslands, lived the Xiongnu. The Xiongnu were a nomadic people, and nomadic means they did not live in fixed homes or cities. They moved constantly across the vast steppes, which are enormous flat grasslands, of Central Asia, following their animals and the seasons. They were extraordinary horsemen. They could ride faster and shoot arrows more accurately than almost any army China could put in the field. They struck quickly, took what they needed, and disappeared back into the vast open landscape before a response could be organized. For the farming communities of northern China, the Xiongnu raids were a source of constant terror. Villages were destroyed. Food stores were stolen. People were killed or taken captive. Qin Shi Huang decided that the answer was a wall, not a small local wall, but a wall that would stretch across the entire northern border of his new empire. A wall so long and so formidable, and formidable means impressive and difficult to overcome, that no raiding army could cross it. He sent his greatest general, Meng Tian, to the north with 300,000 soldiers. Their mission was to push the Xiongnu back and to begin building. And so the first version of what we now call the Great Wall was born. Now, I need to tell you the part of this story that the beautiful photographs do not show. Building the wall was a human catastrophe. The conditions were almost unimaginably harsh, and harsh means extremely difficult and cruel. Workers labored in the burning heat of summer and the killing cold of winter. They worked in mountains where there were no roads, carrying stone and earth on their backs, because there was no other way to move materials up steep slopes. The workers were not volunteers. They were conscripted, and conscripted means forced by the government to come and work, whether they wanted to or not. Farmers were taken from their fields. Criminals were sent to the wall as punishment. Soldiers who had fought in wars were kept on afterwards to continue building. They worked under brutal supervision. Overseers, which means the people in charge of watching the workers, were instructed to maintain production at all costs. If a worker was too sick to continue, they were often simply left where they fell. Chinese legend says that the bodies of workers who died were buried inside the wall itself. Some historians believe this is more myth than fact. But archaeological excavations, which means careful scientific digging to find ancient remains, have found human bones near the foundations of ancient wall sections. The stories are not entirely invented. The wall became known in the poetry and folk songs of the time as the longest cemetery in the world. There is a famous Chinese legend about a woman named Meng Jiangnu. Her husband was taken away to build the wall shortly after their wedding. She waited for him. She sent him warm winter clothes. She received no reply. Finally, she traveled to the wall herself to find him, only to be told that he had died and his body had been built into the wall. In her grief, she wept so intensely that a section of the wall crumbled and fell, revealing her husband's bones. It is a legend, not literal history. But legends are often emotional truth. They capture how people felt, even if the details are not precisely accurate. And this legend tells us exactly how the people of ancient China felt about the wall. It was built on suffering, and the suffering was real. Here is something that surprises most people. After all that sacrifice, the original Qin wall was almost completely abandoned. Qin Shi Huang died in 210 BC. His empire, which he had believed would last for 10,000 generations, collapsed within 4 years of his death. A new dynasty took over, the Han dynasty, and with it came new priorities and new thinking about how to deal with the Xiongnu threat. The Han emperors tried a different approach. Instead of walls, they tried diplomacy, which means negotiating and making agreements to avoid conflict. They made peace deals with the Xiongnu leaders. They offered gifts, trade agreements, and even arranged royal marriages between the two cultures. For a while, it worked. The raids decreased. Trade flourished, which means grew and became successful. The Silk Road, the great trading network that connected China to Central Asia and eventually to Europe, began to develop during this period. But the peace never lasted permanently. Conflict returned, and when it did, the Han emperors found themselves looking at the crumbling remains of the old Qin walls and making a decision. They rebuilt, and then they extended. This pattern, build, abandon, rebuild, extend, repeated itself across Chinese history for nearly 2,000 years. Different dynasties, different philosophies, different enemies, but always the same recurring question. Do we build a wall, or do we find another way? The answer changed depending on who was in power. Some emperors believed the wall was essential. Others thought it was expensive and ineffective. And ineffective means it does not achieve its purpose. One famous general reportedly said that the best wall was not made of stone, but of loyal soldiers. He had a point. The wall could only work if there were enough soldiers to man it. An unmanned wall is just a road. The Great Wall that exists in our photographs and our imaginations, the one with the wide stone walkways and the elegant watchtowers, was not built by Qin Shi Huang. It was built almost 1,800 years later during the Ming Dynasty. The Ming emperors came to power in 1368 after driving out the Mongols, the nomadic people from the north who had conquered China and ruled it for nearly a century. The experience had been traumatic, and traumatic means causing deep and lasting emotional damage. The Ming rulers were determined that nothing like that would ever happen again. They turned to the wall with a new intensity and a new level of engineering sophistication. And sophistication means advanced skill and complexity. Over a period of nearly 200 years, the Ming rebuilt and massively upgraded the wall. They replaced the old rammed earth sections with solid brick and stone. They added the distinctive watchtowers that appear in every photograph, tall, square structures, positioned so that the guards in one tower could always see the guards in the next. No section of the wall would ever be without eyes. They also developed a brilliant communication system. Each watchtower had a supply of wolf dung, and yes, you heard that correctly. Wolf dung, when burned, produces a thick, dark smoke that rises vertically and can be seen from very far away. By burning different combinations of smoke and fire, soldiers could send coded messages across hundreds of kilometers in a matter of hours. It was a military telegraph system, centuries before electricity existed. The Ming Wall stretched approximately 8,850 kilometers. That is roughly the distance from London to New York and halfway back again. It crossed deserts, climbed mountains, and ran along cliff tops so steep that workers had to be lowered down on ropes to lay the bricks. In some places, the wall is wide enough that 6 horses could ride along the top side by side. In other places, it narrows to barely enough room for one person to walk. It is, by any measure, one of the most ambitious construction projects in human history. And now, my friends, comes the most ironic part of the story. Irony is when the opposite of what you expect or intend actually happens. And the Great Wall's greatest irony is this. In the end, it did not stop the invasion it was built to prevent. In 1644, the Ming Dynasty fell. China was conquered by the Manchu people from the northeast, who established the Qing Dynasty, the last imperial dynasty in Chinese history. But here is the fascinating detail. The Manchu did not break through the wall. They did not climb over it or tunnel under it. A Chinese general opened the gate and let them in. His name was Wu Songui. He was a Ming general stationed at a crucial gate in the wall called Shanhai Guan, the pass where the wall meets the sea. He was facing rebellion inside China and enemies outside. Caught between 2 impossible choices, he made his decision. He opened the gate. The wall that had taken centuries to build, that had cost countless lives, that had consumed the resources of empire after empire, was bypassed by a single act of human choice. This does not mean the wall was worthless. For long periods, it genuinely worked. It slowed raids. It gave early warning of attacks. It controlled trade and movement of people. It represented the state's authority across an enormous and difficult landscape. But it also teaches us something important. No physical barrier, no matter how impressive, can substitute for the human decisions made on either side of it. My friends, we have walked a long way together today. We began in the chaos of the warring states, where frightened kingdoms built walls against their neighbors. We stood in the court of a terrifying emperor who dreamed of one unified country, protected by one vast barrier. We heard the weeping of Meng Jiangnu and understood the human cost buried in every stone. We watched the wall being abandoned, rebuilt, abandoned again, an endless cycle of fear and ambition. And finally, we understood the great irony, that the most famous wall in human history could not stop a man simply choosing to open a door. What does the Great Wall really mean? I think it means this. Human beings, when they are afraid, build walls. We have always done this. We do it with stone and bricks. We do it with laws and borders. We do it in our own hearts when we have been hurt and we decide never to be vulnerable, which means open to being hurt. Again, walls give us a feeling of safety. Sometimes that feeling is real. Sometimes it is an illusion, a comforting idea that does not match reality. The Great Wall of China is the grandest, most beautiful, most heartbreaking example of this very human tendency. It was built by millions of hands, paid for with millions of lives, and maintained across 2,000 years of history. It did not make China invincible, and invincible means impossible to defeat. But it did make China eternal. The wall itself became a symbol, not of military power, but of human persistence. The refusal, generation after generation, to stop trying. Today, the wall is crumbling in many places. Sections that are not maintained by the government have been reclaimed by nature. Grass growing through the bricks, trees pushing up through the foundations. It is slowly returning to the earth from which it came. But millions of people still climb its steps every year. They stand on those ancient stones and look out at the mountains rolling away in every direction, and they feel something they cannot quite name. That feeling is the weight of history, the echo of all the hands that carried those bricks, the voices of all the people who stood in this same wind and looked out at the same horizon, afraid of what might be coming. The Great Wall does not belong to China alone. It belongs to the human story. It is the story of our fears, our ambitions, our cruelty, and our extraordinary determination. It is the story of what we build when we are afraid, and what survives long after the fear is gone. Thank you for walking this wall with me today. Take care of yourselves. And remember, the most important walls are the ones we choose to take down. Goodbye for now. I will see you in the next story.